Hello, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of Collateral Damage, a podcast about the impact of substance use on individuals, families, and communities. And today we're going to be introducing you to part two of our very amazing interview with Andrew Burki, where we talked about the economic impact that this has had on families, individuals, communities as a whole. And Maureen, I know that this was a good interview for you. You and Andrew go back quite a bit. So,
You know what I love? I am a huge Andrew Burki fan, but I think that he's kind of like thinking about being the president of his fan club. There's lots of people that like him, but I think that it's not just he recognizes all the things that we're not doing well, and we
right.
all know that what's not working. But he has
Yeah.
answers too, and that's really what I like about Andrew is that he doesn't sit and complain but he takes those situations and he tries to figure out these out of the box answers to what might change things, and that I like. That I
Yeah, no,
like.
me too. I mean, every time we talked about a topic, it was like it was almost like there was this underlying big picture solution. Like there's something that
Right.
could be done about it, which is, so much different than, maybe some of the more traditional conversations where we complain about this immovable object, this unfixable scenario.
Right.
And I think he did a great job of highlighting some of the solutions that people are discussing, that they're making available. And, at least in the first part of this, it was primarily focused on outlining the issues that exist. And I think in the second part of this interview, he really started to get into the solutions, like what can be
Right.
done on a personal or individual level, or, how can you get loud and join the movement.
Right.
Right.
And he's a person that has seen, kind of seen the big picture, seen the problem and addressed it and really created some lasting change and different ways of doing things. So I am really excited to see what he's going to make happen, because I don't
Mhm.
think that this is just like conversation for him. This is not
No.
like an intellectual, delve into what we could possibly be doing. He intends on making these things happen. So he's going to be an exciting person to watch in the future, I think.
Yeah, well, and you and I talked about this. I mean, the guests that we have on, it's like, I'm interested in learning. I'm interested in bringing
Right.
these new insights and these new perspectives to our listeners. And Andrew definitely lays out, from his personal experience in treatment, with YPR, with just his involvement. He brings an element of, maybe just such a big picture view of this, like I was saying earlier, that some
Right.
people just don't get to consider. And
Right.
this interview was nice. I'm glad we got enough, but we had to split it in two. And the
Yeah.
second part of this is going to be good for everybody to follow up on. So,
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to listen.
all right. Well, here is the second half of Andrew's episode. Hmm.
Because I had to be subsidized with my recovery housing. I
Of
mean, I was
course.
in Florida. I made $5.25 an hour plus tips, which were entirely in quarters.
Can't survive on that.
Back through the ghetto with my car that's full of quarters every night. There's no way I could have paid for my recovery house without my parents, subsidizing. I mean, I could contributed 100% of my earnings and still would have fallen short.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, that we all go through that. I mean, I went through that. Coming out of jail, and trying to put my life back together. It wasn't like I came out with a full-time job, able to get my own apartment and care for myself. I mean, you got to be subsidized somehow. And I mean, I have to look at the issue, because I've been in the industry. I've been working in this field for the last 10 years, and really hands-on with families, doing interventions. We have a men's sober living environment up here in Massachusetts, and so we're seeing who's coming out, and we're seeing the gap in services, so to speak. Everything we've been alluding to up to this point. That
Right.
it's if this was to be addressed, I mean, it would take a complete systemic overhaul. I mean, the entire system would have to change. Our perspective of it, our approach toward it, is no longer just how do we react to it, how do we deal with the symptoms. I heard someone use an analogy the other day of pulling people out of a river. That we're standing on the side of a river and we're just watching all these bodies floating by, and so we're reaching in and pulling them out, pulling these people out of this river. And it takes somebody to step outside of that role and say, not help me pull these people out of the river. It's, hey, does somebody want to take a walk upstream and figure out why people are jumping into this river? It's less about the reaction to the people in the river and more to why it's happening. And I think that's
Right.
where, in my opinion, that's where the focus needs to be. Is somebody needs to break off, and yes, people need to be pulled out of the river. Those services need to exist, and I'm glad that they do. But to a certain extent, I actually want my public officials, my policy changers, I want them to be upstream. I want them to be figuring out why people are jumping off a cliff to get into the river in the first place, and work on that while the rest of us are on the front lines pulling people out of the river. And so it's going to take a collective effort to do it. And I know we always try to get some insight from our guests, and you're immersed in this field, and if there was one thing that you could really focus on or speak up about, or one thing that you could change, or one thing that you could speak to our listeners about that they could do differently, I mean, as it relates to this topic, the economic impact, or just addressing it as a whole, if there was one thing you could change, what would it be?
I mean, it would be creating equitable access to care. You should be able to walk into treatment in this country and it's cheaper, right? I mean, that's the really important thing to understand. Providing treatment for everyone is cheaper than not providing treatment for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And it creates,
it's so silly that's not common sense.
Problems. It's all, with like the tax credits thing, right? The day that, your publicly funded or, private in-network facility can go to, whoever, Amazon, and say, hey, here's $10 million in tax liability reduction for you. We need $9.4 million to pay for the socioeconomically disadvantaged people that we're providing services to. That's what people don't understand, right? There's like an argument between is treatment or harm reduction better? And they're the same thing. Like, treatment is a subset of harm reduction. Mm-hmm. It's you wake up, you're homeless and addicted to opioids, you go to detox, you are not homeless at the end of that night. It immediately addresses the systemic problem. It's the same with recovery housing, right? Like the recovery house. You want people to be able to build stable lives that are worth staying in recovery for. You have to connect the pieces along the way. I mean, how are you going to apply for a job when you don't have a place to live? And the day we have equitable access to care, 90% of the homeless population of every single city would be able to go to treatment for substance use disorder, mental health concerns, and or both. And that would actually create a small enough population that the people that really fell through the cracks because of layoffs and economic downturns and things like that are ending up homeless as a result of that, the city would be able to help them, get back on their feet for other reasons. But the majority of people in jail have substance use disorders. The majority of homeless people have substance use disorders and or mental health concerns, right? And so it's, you're just looking at so many people falling through the cracks. And the reality is, you shouldn't have to come from the background that I come from to be able to access care in this kind. If you do, great. You can come to Life of Purpose. We'll get your kid in college. It's going to turn out great. But that's not a viable solution for society as a whole. It is, and I just refuse to accept that we don't have money to provide services, because we do have money to pay for jail. If we're willing to spend $1.5 million over a 20-year period of time punishing someone for getting caught with drugs in the wrong city, then we can do you know how many people you can put through treatment for $1.5 million? I mean, it is a lot. Recovery housing, I mean, you could house hundreds of people for years, right? Not that you even need to, but I mean, it's just such a staggering amount of money. And the fact that we have a system where you have to pay money to hire a good lawyer to respectfully decline equitable access to prison so that you can get inequitable access to treatment is fucking insane.
I love the respectfully decline.
It's totally. I mean, it's just a terrible system.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say. Is we need people out there advocating to fill in all these gaps, because it's not just about I mean, everyone right now is on this huge kick, like, oh, we're going to sue Purdue, and Purdue, the economic impact is so massive that if they literally, I mean, if they were like, okay, Citizens United, corporations are people, we're going to execute a corporation, dismantle this entire company and sell its component pieces. Like, I mean, it wouldn't even come close to dealing with the economic impact from 1 year, let alone the 20 years going back and 20 years going forward that we're going to have to pay for.
It's not the answer. It's not the answer.
Alone. That doesn't even get into alcohol and other stuff.
Right.
Well, we've spent a lot of time talking about like the macro issue, you know what I mean? And it's, I can't even wrap my head around it sometimes that, all that money spent to incarcerate individuals that are struggling with a mental illness or a substance use disorder. In addition, the tens of millions or even billions of dollars that are spent every year fighting the war on drugs. No, not that I have a problem with people who are employed by those agencies that spend all of their time fighting it, but there's a lot of money spent pushing back a supply when the demand is where the attention needs to be. I mean, again, diverting those funds to the services that are actually required, and on a macro level, it's understandable. On a more personal level, the micro level of this is, one-to-one, what can we do? What can we is it changing our language? Is it speaking out more? Is it showing up more? Is it having people who have children in recovery show up and stand out in front of a place and advocate that wellness is possible, and this is what it took. I feel like that's maybe what we can do. That's something that's palatable to the average person.
Sure. Well, absolutely. And a big part of it, the problem is so big that like it requires legislative changes.
Absolutely.
So I mean, one of the best ways to get involved is, get involved with your local recovery advocacy organizations. Call up your senator, call up your congressperson, write letters, show up to hearings. I mean, America is such a dysfunctional political system that the people that show up, who are very few and far between, are the ones who get to like have a seat at the table and have a voice. I mean, look at the drinking age, right? The drinking age in the single most valuable market on earth is 21 instead of 18 because of MAD back in the 80s, because of like angry moms being like, this is unacceptable, and showing up. I mean, that is, moms are like the Navy SEALs of the recovery advocacy movement. I mean, we can get 10,000 kids in recovery out there and like 15 moms have like a bigger voice. Presidents of the United States, governors of states, senators, like nobody messes with moms, right?
True.
I mean, literally 3 moms can get a meeting with a senator. So, and dads too, but I mean, I'm partial to moms because my mom was the one that was like, guns blazing for me the whole time. My dad's very pragmatic. He was like, listen, we got a kid in Georgetown, we got a kid in Oxford, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Right? You got to cut our losses.
Yeah, if you got a group of dads, out there, it would probably be a different story. We might not get as much done as a group of moms, but I agree with you, and I love the advocacy. I mean, Maureen, this is your area right here, moms advocating, and you're.
I think not enough people think they can make a difference, but you can. And if everybody just did a little something. But I totally agree with you when you talk about how it's, I feel sometimes that we're putting this on the backs of people who have lost children to push this cause, to get out in front of people, to attend those meetings, to meet with the senators. And after your child has gone through this, and I mean, I understand. You're like so done. You've had enough, and you want to go back to living this life that you thought you were going to have if you're lucky enough to have gotten through this with your child. But I feel like I have a responsibility to all those people that have lost children not to do that, and all those people that haven't had to experience this yet, that may, to get out there in front of this. It's not over for me. It's never going to be over for me. And I think that that after you go through this, you have a unique knowledge of what it's like to live with that fear of losing your child to this disease. And we have a responsibility to keep the conversation going and to make sure that other people don't have to go through this, and that we do honor the memories of the people that that we've lost.
Right.
Well, and building out those systems prevents someone else from bearing their kid, right? Like we don't think about it in those terms, but like the parents that went in Pennsylvania and advocated for free recovery high school for every single family that has an adolescent with substance use disorder, like some family whose kid's 15 years old and they have no idea how terrible the next 3 years of their life is about to become. Right, is going to benefit from that system, and the end result is they're gonna watch their kid walk across a stage at college, with this little cap and gown, instead of like going and visiting him at the local cemetery, right? Because of this work that some parents that they may never meet, that they may never know, did, and so that's why it's so important, and that's why the local stuff is so important, right? Everyone's waiting for some big national solution. And that'll be great, but like it's all about local. Right? It's all about
it's not gonna
in the trenches, in your specific town, in your specific city. What that looks like is different for everyone, but it is the sum of all of our little efforts that is going to turn the tide on something that's this scale. We don't have like a Martin Luther King of the recovery advocacy movement coming that's going to solve this problem. It's going to take all of us.
Right.
But it's a fight worth winning.
Right.
Right.
I mean, no, go ahead.
You were talking earlier about piecing things together and length of stay. That was the thing that I saw when my daughter was going through this, that the treatment just wasn't long enough. We needed longer term. We needed our loved ones to be in some form of treatment and some kind of support for at least the first year. And that's why my thing has always been housing, because if we can't get the length of treatment, we can't get that extended overnight. That's not going to happen. Sorry to say, I think that we're going to lose a lot of people before we realize that it's 90 days inpatient and then extended periods of time after that. But if we can at least provide good, strong recovery housing, and that's, like you were saying, these are not insurmountable things to do. In Massachusetts, between $500 and $800 usually will get you in a sober house for a month, and there is no reason in the world why that shouldn't be included as part of treatment, because you cannot come out of treatment and have no place to live, and you don't have a job, and you don't have a means to support yourself, and you don't have food. How exactly are people expected to get well? It's just not reasonable. So but these are the things it all comes down to money. It always all comes down to money.
It all comes down to money, but it's not even like we're being smart about this with our money, right?
Exactly.
It's all this shell game, so you subsidize recovery housing, right? Let's say you subsidize recovery housing. For a tiny amount, let's say you subsidize it for $200.
It's an absolutely ridiculously tiny amount
a week, right? Ambulance rides are like $2,600, right? So if you have 13 people that get a $200 per month subsidy for their recovery housing, that now brings that in range, and one of them doesn't go on one ambulance ride to the ER, that just paid for itself.
Exactly.
That's a small expense. That's not even talking about if we were actually providing, treatment for the people that show up, which is, you look at like mental, right? So I'm for harm reduction. I'm pro harm reduction. I think that, it's really important for people that are, in the treatment field, that are in long-term abstinence-based recovery, to be supportive of harm reduction. But harm reduction is just one more, overdose prevention sites, for example, right? That's just one of many, many, many tools, right? And everyone's like, oh, look at Canada, look at Switzerland, look at Portugal, and in all of those places, you have access to treatment every single day that you go there. So, here it's a huge problem because we wouldn't create, if you look at mental health, for example, which has actually been better about advocating than substance use disorder, even though it's the same organ that's diseased. If I show up in a hospital emergency room with cigarette burns on my arm, right? I'm putting cigarettes out on my arm and hurting myself. I get 72 hours of immediate services, right? They put me, I get housing, I get to meet with a psychiatrist, there's a lethality assessment. And the reason we do that as a society is because we want to make sure that I'm not going to die by suicide because I'm not well. If I show up literally dead, I've actually killed myself from an opioid overdose and have to be brought back to life, they're like, oh, well, that's not self-harm. Right? So like, see you later 90 minutes after I show up at the hospital. I can actually show up at the same hospital 5 times in the course of one day from repeated overdoses, and they'll just keep treating me in a lot of these cities. And now we've got public officials being like, well, Narcan's expensive, so we don't really want to continue doing this, which is totally, I mean, if you think about, think about that with like heart disease. If it was like, oh, this guy keeps eating cheese, we've already used the defibrillator twice on him, like in Wisconsin or some, cheese place. Like, we are not going to use this defibrillator a 3rd or 4th time. I mean, it would be a class action lawsuit.
Right.
Again, it does come down to, if we actually look at this, and again, if the 3 of us could sit down and we could craft up exactly what it would take to help people to change these things. And I always get hung up on the macro side of this, is that, and I applaud you. I applaud your effort. I applaud all the work and effort that you guys are putting in to change policy and to submit this stuff through the to the president, to whoever. I'm not sitting around waiting for the government to come in and solve this. It is going to take people like yourself on the front lines, people like Maureen, people who are fighting for policy change, people who are showing up at events and screaming and letting them know that what they're funding is not working. I just always run up against the machine of it all, and that, like, I look at, you brought up Portugal and what they do, these other places that have made these changes where they've decriminalized everything and diverted all their funds and refocused them to this being a public health issue. And hey, all that money we were spending to lock people up for being ill and having problems, let's divert it over to this, multi-level treatment center that treats everything from the first floor of HAT, heroin-assisted treatment, all the way up to full residential services. And let's reduce crime, and let's keep people from dying, and let's just get them in the door. And they treated it like their citizens were human beings with souls, people who could produce, people who could contribute. And that's insane. And that's like a solution-based approach, but their machine is also so much smaller. Ours is so much bigger. The 300+ million American experiment, where we're still trying to figure it all out, and they're over there generations ahead of us fixing it.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying, and like there is definitely that component on the federal level that there's more of us. It's easier to do this with small people, or with a smaller population. But and this is one of the reasons to get involved in state state level politics and
state to state to state,
county level and city level legislation, right? Because actually, like, Massachusetts as a state is smaller than most European most of the big developed European nations that are getting some of this stuff done. I mean, Massachusetts is, the U.S. is bigger than France, but Massachusetts isn't.
Right.
And geographically, it's like the size of Switzerland, right? So I mean, if you could, and in Switzerland, I mean, they were just like, listen, we're not giving all of these services to people just for them. We're also giving it to the rest of us. What we don't like? Heroin-related crime in this country. And you know what they don't have anymore? Heroin-related. I mean, it is a big deal if you have an elimination of crime because of the fact that you are actually providing services. This is one of the things that I have a huge problem with, like these sort of insufficient services, right? So like, if I'm homeless, if I'm hungry, if I'm addicted, and from a physiological standpoint, right? I have a substance use disorder, but I'll actually go into withdrawals if I don't use this. I mean, of course I'm going to commit crimes. You know, I did commit crimes.
It's survival.
So,
You got to survive.
I didn't have money and I didn't have a skill set and I was unemployable and my parents weren't going to just like pay for me to buy heroin. So, you know, that pushed me into this, you know, and it's like 20 years ago in the 90s and, you know, it was much safer to have a substance use disorder back then than now because we didn't have, you know, these vast quantities of fentanyl in the heroin supply. But, you know, the fact of the matter is like every single time that I went to treatment, like I didn't commit any crimes while I was in treatment. I didn't use any drugs while I was in treatment. Yeah. My substance use immediately dropped to zero the second I went there. So why wouldn't we want that for everyone?
Of course.
Why, you know, I remember, and you talked about it. Like you remember leaving jail, right? I mean, remember when you left jail? I mean, I remember when I left jail and I looked back and I saw people who typically had a darker skin complexion than me and typically weren't coming from the same socioeconomic bracket that my parents are in. And some of them are still there for the exact same treatable health condition that I got very, very good treatment for multiple times until it worked. Like, why as a society would we not want everyone to have access to the same system of care that I got that obviously works, as evidenced by the fact that we're currently having a conversation about it?
Right. There's a small town in Massachusetts outside of Boston that started to go to, when there was an overdose, took a police officer and an advocate, went to the door, knocked on the door, and offered help. They offered treatment after they offered help for the family. They offered training on Narcan, and they offered access to treatment, which is much easier in Massachusetts than it is anywhere else in the country.
Absolutely.
And in addition to seeing the death rate fall, less overdose deaths in that particular city, they also saw lowering of petty crime. So the crime that they saw, car break-ins, things like that, things that people do because they need drugs, quickly grab something, they saw that reduced as well. And we brought that into the town where I lived, and we started to do the same program. And immediately we saw less overdoses. We saw less deaths because the people that were overdosing had Narcan, which might have been supplied by the police department. And we saw the lowering of petty crime. I mean, it's just so obvious that if you do one thing, the next thing happens, that I'm not sure why. And I am very proud to live here because we are way ahead usually on just about everything. Right. And I agree with you. I think this is the way to do it. You make a model somewhere, and then other people replicate it. And it's going to take time, unfortunately. And in that time, we are going to lose people.
Yeah. And I think that point that you just made is so critical. And this is, back to your point about making like how do I get involved? How do I actually affect change?
Right.
There are places in this country where this is already working, and it's working at the local level and it's working at the state level, and they've seen, but especially at the local level, at county levels, at city levels, where there's actually a reduction in deaths. There's multiple towns up in Massachusetts that have done stuff. Palm Beach County, Florida has been like really front line on this. Dayton, Ohio. I mean, Dayton, Ohio. They just like went around and they were like, "Who needs help?" Like everyone in the city.
What a novel idea! Yeah,
have to stop people from dying.
Yeah,
like who needs help? What can we do with our limited resources? How are we going to allocate some of this, block grant money that's coming in and federal aid that's coming in to actually help the citizens here? And those places, like those towns in Massachusetts, those towns in Ohio, those towns in Florida. I mean, they have seen reductions in the number of overdose deaths at a time when other places that didn't implement those policies continue to see deaths increase or stay at very, very high levels, right? So, I mean, this is not like a theoretical, when we talk about like what can be done in America, right? What can be done in the United States of America, not in Portugal, not in Canada, not in Switzerland, in the United States of America, there are places that have already done this and we already have results. It's not theoretical. It's not like this should work. This actually works. And you're doing it. I mean, there are multiple, cities and counties up in Massachusetts that have already done it. And the whole rest of the country should be modeling their policies off of that. We still need big federal solutions. It's still ridiculous that, 5 people die from Ebola and we immediately get $5 billion of federal funding.
And all the planes shut down. Nobody can leave the country. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's, like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people have died from, drugs in the last couple decades. And alcohol has been, just rolling strong for a very long time. I mean, like, a century.
Right.
And we are still, not implementing national solutions, but a small, don't ever underestimate what a small dedicated group of, parents and children and people who have personally been touched by this, you can do, and the impact they can have on a community. Even one person sometimes. Shelley Young, I know you were just on her, I think you're on her family recovery conference.
I am.
Maureen? Yeah, she just went and was like, hey, my kid has a substance use disorder. This other kid in my town has cancer. I would like them to be treated the same because they both have diseases. And the town was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And literally like the whole town changed its view on substance use disorder from one mom.
Just a common sense approach.
That mentality that we don't know what to do. There's no solution, and I can't do anything myself. Well, that's just not true. I mean, it's just not true. That's how all change starts. All change starts with one person believing they can make a difference.
Just to your point, I hear you guys. We keep talking about this. What can be done? What one mom can do. What one voice can do, and. What I keep thinking of is, and when I was saying the big picture is sometimes so overwhelming to think about the machine that needs to change to solve this problem. The point I'm trying to make is that this process can be addressed. And it's the old adage that I hear is, how do you eat an elephant? Anybody know how to do it? One bite at a time.
I heard the point.
Every single thing that we do, everything
a bite at a time. No, he's 100% right.
Everything.
That's how you have to do it. That's how we're going to have to address this.
Well, that's it. That's the solution.
It's the sum of all the small victories that is really going to turn the tide on this. To your point, though, that's 100% correct, right? It is the old adage, like, how do you eat an elephant? And it's a bite at a time. And you really need to, you really need to think about like what we're doing in those terms, because there is no one massive overhaul solution. You look at the biggest bills that they're getting through in Congress, and they are woefully insufficient to address this problem as a single piece of legislation, right? And it is all of these little victories at the local level, at the state level, little private nonprofits that are being set up and the impact that they're having on the community. It's the journalist that decides they're going to, cover recovery instead of just death, which is, something that I think is a tremendous problem.
Right.
Like nobody cares, right? You can be like 500 people go to college, and like do well and become successful members of society. And they're like, that's not a flashy enough story.
No, it's so true. I mean, nobody wants to. It's like we're stuck on death, and I understand, because it's horrifying how many people we're losing. But we also have to talk about how many people are recovering from this and living productive lives and contributing to society and remaining here to do good work. And we're not talking about that. So it's allowing people to write everyone off, paint them with a broad brush. We're going to lose them anyhow. What's the point?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually one of the things I really like about, your book and your story and like the message that you convey. I mean, like, obviously the mom with a baseball bat at the beginning is like pretty awesome. It's like something out of a Tarantino film, but I mean, the thing that's like really cool, and one of the things that's really cool about your message is that, like, she makes it. Right. And we have to tell that side of the story too. Right. I don't think the two things are mutually exclusive. We need to be outraged at the level of death. Like, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. But by the same token, like, we need to carry a message of hope. Because I mean, my God, if you are a family of a child who develops a substance use disorder and the only new, and it's on everything, right? Like MSNBC and Fox News are covering the story the same way, which is a whole bunch of people are dying, right? If you don't have a message of hope, like, I mean, like, why would you even fight? I think there's a lot of people, that don't know that there's actually like hope at the end of the tunnel, and that that it's a fight worth fighting, and they're trying to figure it out. And this is why you have, all these families that are like running like bootleg treatment centers in their basement, with like a PlayStation 3 and, like some medication, right? But they're not getting all of these other aspects. They're not, and this is, and particularly with young people, I think it's so important, because this is like what young people need. If recovery is awesome, you're going to stay in recovery, right? And all those things that like I did, once upon a time when I was young, were really critical to my recovery, right? It's the glow in the dark ultimate frisbee on the beach. It's, getting together with my buddies on 4th of July, and like, we're not drinking beer, but I mean, we were definitely setting off an excessive amount of fireworks, and all of these different things, right? Like going to concerts, like 20 or 30 kids deep, so because you cross a threshold, right? If I go to like a concert or like a college football game, like by myself, like, sure, that's a, recovery hostile environment, right? But if I go with 50 other people in recovery, I mean, it's awesome.
Not anymore. Absolutely.
It's not anymore.
I think the whole recovery, the activities related around, sober activities and recovery related activities are starting to catch on, thank goodness. Because I don't understand the whole idea that we can't do anything without drinking or using drugs. I mean, even for people that don't have a problem, is that really a thing? Like you can't go and have a good time without that? That's a problem. You might want to look in the mirror and ask yourself if you have a problem as well, if you can't spend an afternoon or an evening without drinking.
Yeah, they actually have, I think it was in Chicago Tribune, I was reading something about this, where they actually have like a number of people that are sort of just like, they're not really like in recovery from a substance use disorder. Like possibly they might have had like substance misuse, but they're actually setting up like social activities for people just that don't drink, because it's so prevalent in our society. Like it's really hard to go and meet people without alcohol being part of the equation. If you're like a 25-year-old, it's like it's everywhere. It's not like you don't go bowling, you go drinking and go bowling. What was it called? It was like the weirdest. Sober Curious. Like you should Google it. It was really weird. They have these like events that are set up, and they're not for people that are in recovery per se. They're just like, I feel like I don't repeat the same joke over and over and over again. And you actually have a lot of people that just that don't drink, that don't have a problem and don't use drugs or do it in a non-problematic fashion. And those people are all of our allies too. Right? I mean, we got to include all those people in the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate it. I think you're fascinating and brilliant and all things good. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing. And hopefully, we'll a year from now when you're president. Hopefully you'll be on again. I always love hearing what's going on in your head.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate you having me.
All right, guys. Thanks. You, Andrew.
Take care.
Man, I that was just the second part of this interview with Andrew Burki was just amazing, and
he's great.
He is great, and getting to the cliffhanger of how can we actually address this, where we left it in part one, giving everybody what they've been waiting to hear, which is starting to talk about the solutions and what people can do on an individual level, on a group level, like if this was to get addressed, what would it take? Right.
That's what I love about him. He's not a hand wringer. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? He actually has answers. I don't know. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of him in the future. I hope, anyhow.
Well, yeah, him and I mean all the other people that are out there advocating for this. Like these are big ideas made by big people, that are trying to change the next generation of how we address this and make sure that people have access to treatment and that people are getting the care that they need. I think he said something like, on like a primary care level, like just being able to walk through the front door and getting the services. Like, why shouldn't you if it's a medical condition?
Exactly.
Like
Exactly.
why isn't it treated like anything else? And why are people so baffled and confused when someone comes in looking for help? Like, it shouldn't be
Right,
that way at
because
this point.
totally agree. I totally agree. And it's good to hear somebody who's I believe is going to make some changes, much like yourself, Mr. Wilson,
Oh, me?
who
Yes.
I
Okay.
first started going to your groups on Thursday nights to steal all your information. And now I am
Yes.
so happy that you've written a book and I don't have to try to remember it. I can just look it up and steal your information directly from your book.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I feel the same way about the book. And so I believe, are you talking about this book right here, Loving Lions?
I am, as a
Okay,
matter of
all right.
fact. Yes, I am.
And so when I wrote this book, it started off as just a whole bunch of the things that I like to share. The stories, the analogies, the metaphors, the things that I've used over the last decade to try to help families and individuals understand substance use better, to understand the family dynamics better. And so it originally started as me just writing a whole bunch of things down so that I could free up some space in this aging mind of mine. And, it was so that I didn't have to remember them all the time. So,
Yeah.
but then it became a book. And then it turned out that it was something that I could get to people and, in a very similar way to, the reasons why you wrote your book was to reach the people who maybe don't understand or maybe have never experienced this before or really don't know if they do have someone in their family that's struggling and what they can do about it. So
Right.
it was a journey to write. It was definitely a journey to try to get to a place where I was comfortable putting it out there for people to read and review and give me feedback on because I had never done it before. But the book is definitely geared toward family members, individuals, somebody that loves somebody that might be struggling. I've even had people who they themselves have struggled and read through, the first section of the book, which is more focused on my own experience and helping people understand my struggle with substance use and how I was able to get well and what that looked like for me. And having people kind of read that and identify with it and realize that maybe there is some hope. The simple fact that I am here now talking to you and that we have this podcast and that I've written this book and that I'm working with families. I mean, there is hope for people just like myself that were as bad as I was, that now you can be here.
Yeah. What would you have thought if somebody would have told you 10 or 15 years ago that you'd be doing this right now?
I probably would have laughed and then done some drugs. Because
Yes.
that's where I was.
So-
It was the idea of having a normal life was hilarious and unacceptable. The idea that I would be anything other than what I was just laughable at the time. Not because I didn't think I could do it, but because there was no pathway. There was no path in that direction. What I was doing was I was surviving the day. I was surviving the moment. I was, I was trying to find a way to feel good on the inside, and I was trying to find a way to get relief from a world that I didn't understand.
Right. So that's what I love about your book. So for a parent reading it, who doesn't really, I mean, you think you understand these things, but I don't think you really can completely understand until if you haven't gone through it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So you give this unique perspective of someone who has gone through this, but
Right.
then also like the heads up from someone who's gone through this.
Yeah.
So you have this great way of putting everything in just very clear and telling stories and talking about your own experience, but also a lot of what you say, I think to myself, oh my God, that's so simple, but I never thought about it like that before. And that's what I love about your book, and I love about, when you speak and when you in the groups you have locally. But the book, you really do sum up a lot of what you talk about in groups, and it's always that moment of, oh my God, yes, of course. And that's why I like to steal your stuff. But it's also why I would recommend your book to any parent that's going through this, because it's just really good advice. And we all need as much advice as we can get. And it's very non-judgmental and you don't have this is the way to do it, but it makes you see more clearly how to go about thinking about this in a different way. And I think
Right.
it's a very, very valuable book.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I will just say that, when writing the book, it's a very complex issue. You know what I mean? The substance abuse itself and the dynamics within families. But, what I've learned is that, if you really do understand something, you should be able to explain it simply. And that's why I made this an easy to read book, full of very simple explanations about something very complex and challenging. And I think once you can wrap your head around just the basics of this, it shows that it's manageable. It can be addressed. There is a solution. There is hope. There is a reason to keep fighting. And just like, your book, my book, all the people who are trying to help these struggling individuals understand that there's a chance. There's hope. Don't
Right.
give up. Don't stop fighting. Don't stop learning. Don't stop, accumulating information and educating yourself and your family system, because in the end, maybe you can do something different. Maybe you can
Right.
actually help.
Absolutely. And I think I forget that I'm thinking about it from a parent's perspective, but really for somebody who's struggling, who's going back and forth between recovery, to this book is valuable for somebody like that too. And so it's called Loving Lions, right?
It is, yeah. Loving Lions,
And-
a guide for families struggling with addiction.
And where would you buy this book?
So you can get this book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or you can go to lovinglions.com, which will tell you all the different ways that you can get the book. Or you can just call me directly if you know me. As you said, plenty of ways to get it. And the idea is just to get the message out there as far as we possibly can. So,
It's awesome.
all right.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'd like to thank all of our listeners for joining us today on this episode of Collateral Damage. As always, if you'd like to find out all the different ways that you can listen to our podcast, you can visit our website, which is www.cdpodcast.com. There are many different ways to listen and subscribe, and we encourage you to choose the one that's most appropriate for you. And as always, I would encourage our listeners to get informed.
Stay connected.
Thank you for joining us.